Hey class, Prof JC, and I hope that your summers are going well, that your summer is going well, and that you are experiencing as much as you can. I know all of you are busy with your coursework this summer, but I'm hoping you're having a chance to get outside. It's been so cold this entire year, at least in my opinion. It's really nice to see the sun coming out and the heat. I just came off the water, spent most of the day on the water today, and it's just beautiful out there. We're lucky to live in San Diego, so I hope you're out there enjoying it, in addition to all the work that you're doing, and I have a lot of respect for your journey, but I hope you're enjoying your summer. Hey, we're going to continue in our series here, our final week, where we're going to talk about this idea of trust and what that means. And we've started off and we've looked at the enemies of trust. We looked at this idea of how do you maintain trust through difficult times, right? And those of you who've been leading in recent years, you understand this. You've come through some really trying times. You've come through some really difficult times as a leader, I'm sure. And trust is key in all of this. You know, this entire class is on purpose, and how do we keep people moving towards the purpose of the organization, moving towards the purpose of the team, you know, whatever that may be. Well, we've got to have trust is a big key in maintaining purpose moving forward. I think it's one of the most important things that we have to focus on in our leadership journey. So let's talk about this. There will be times in your leadership journey that you're going to have to start over. And it might mean that there's a product or service that didn't work out, and so you have to start over from scratch on that. It might be, if you're in kind of a nonprofit, sector, it might be an initiative that didn't work out. It could be something that happened where the trust was broken inside the organization. Right now, all of you have heard about the many layoffs that we're seeing just all across the world, but especially here in the United States of America. We're hearing a lot about these larger companies who are laying off people. In some ways, that's a breaking down of trust. And so these leaders who are leading through that, for the people who stay on board, they're having to almost start over again. And maybe you've been in that situation in your company where you've had to lay some people off, or you have a team that's half the size of what it was 2 years ago. And everybody who's left behind, it's not even the people who get let go, the people who get laid off, who lose trust within the organization or trust for the organization. It's also the people who stay behind, right? So there's all kinds of reasons why trust could be broken. So today I want to talk about how do we rebuild trust when it's time to start over, when maybe something has happened, trust has been broken. How do you rebuild it? Okay. So we're going to continue in this article that we've been looking at, and here's what it has to say. There are times when inevitably trust will be badly damaged somewhere in your organization. You've probably experienced that before. And there's nothing that you can do to stop the breakdown. Your only choice, other than finding a different job, is to rebuild. But maybe that's not an option for you, right? Finding a new job. And so maybe you're loyal to you're loyal to the company, you're loyal to your boss, you believe in your company, you believe in its mission. You want to stay, so then you've got to rebuild trust if you're going to stay put. So here are the things that you've got to do if you're going to start over, and it starts with this. Number one is this. First, you have to figure out exactly what happened. And here's some questions that it gives to ask when you're figuring out exactly what happened. First, you can ask, how quickly or slowly did trust break down? Second, you ask the question, when did the violation of trust become known to you and to the larger organization? Okay. And then it goes on to say here, if you've known that something was amiss, but failed to acknowledge the loss of trust or respond appropriately for a considerable period of time, that lag will compound employees' feelings of betrayal, right? So it's important to know when the violation of trust became known. Another question you're going to ask is, was there a single cause? I've talked about this before in other classes, the importance of systems thinking. And it's important to know, is this just a one-time thing that happened, or is this a pattern? And then if it's a pattern, you've got to look at the entire system. How did the system allow this pattern to happen? And then you've got to ask yourself the question, was the loss of trust reciprocal? It goes on to say, if your trust was violated and others say that theirs was too, chances are no one will behave fair or objectively. It's acceptable to be angry when your trust has been betrayed, but retaliatory or vindictive, never. We've seen organizations spiral downwards as people try to hurt others who violated their trust. If you discern that the loss of trust in your organization is reciprocal and deep-seated, a formal process of conflict resolution might be in order. So again, you've got to come back and you've just got to figure out what happened. That means you've got to dive deep in on it. I've told you before that I've worked for some churches, and when you work for churches, there are things that happen, right? You've got human beings that come on board, and for different reasons, people have to be let go. And I remember one time there was a pastor who was something was going on. I mean, this was pretty serious, and I think he was my understanding was he was having a relationship with someone who was maybe not underage, but close to underage. And this guy was an older gentleman and had a family and all that stuff. And he was there one day, gone the next. And I remember people started asking questions, and I was lucky enough, I guess you might say, to be in the room when I heard people talking about the process. And the process that they went through was pretty intense. I think they knew about it for a little while. I mean, it was like from the time they got the information to the time they let him go. For him, it was immediate, but it was about a week. And the process they did was just diving deep on the situation. And they talked to as many people as they could. They tried not to alert him, but they talked to as many people as they could. They tried to get as much information as possible. My understanding is even after they shared with him, they tried to do some digging even after he was gone. But they did a thorough investigation, I guess you might call it that, human resources did, and they found that, that the accusations were true, and so he was let go. But it was pretty impressive to me how serious that they took that. And it wasn't just at face value, hey, somebody said this about so-and-so, and then they kind of filed it away, whatever. They jumped on it quickly. They had lots of conversations, lots of investigation, lots of asking of questions. And then when they came to the conclusion, they realized that this person needs to go. And so that person was gone. But what they were doing was just figuring out what happened. And that was one of the most important things, is they wanted to know. I think that this is one of the things that shocked me. They wanted to know every detail. I mean, they were polling because this gentleman had an organization phone. He had a company phone, basically. And so they were pulling data off of that. They're contacting the service provider, trying to get as much information as they could. How many text messages? Where were they? What were the? I mean, just loads and loads of information, because they recognized that this was going to be a trust breaker, right? And somehow, now obviously this person was let go, so that was a good thing. That helped to rebuild trust. But somehow they were going to have to restore trust. And part of that is just, again, you got to figure out what happened. And part of figuring out what happened, or why you figure out what happened, is so that you can go back and say, how do we not let this happen again? Okay, so that's number one. Number two is this. Second, when you have a reasonably good handle on what happened, so again, you've done all the investigation, you know what happened, you have to ascertain the depth and the breadth of the loss of trust. Okay, so in this situation, they had to look at it and they had to say, okay, where is the loss of trust? How deep did it go? How wide did it go? And this was a major church. This person had been platformed quite a bit on the platform, but really his impact was in one area. Which was a pretty large area. It had to do with the children and the youth, right? So that's a pretty big deal. And so when they saw how much trust had been broken and who would be impacted by it, who was impacted by it, I think there was a letter that went out or an email that went out, and obviously they couldn't share the details of everything. I just happen to know the details because I happen to be behind the scenes, so I was able to be privy to some of those details. But they didn't send that out. They just said, hey, there's been a situation, and so and so has been let go. But that's part of it, is understanding, once you know what happened, who all is going to be impacted by this. How far has trust been broken? Now, if you're in a church, and that's what this was, and this was a very large church, thousands of people come every single weekend, they recognized that there would have to be some trust rebuilding, because you've got kids involved. And now people are asking, and I think some rumors got out there. I don't think people knew exactly what happened, but some rumors got out there. You've got parents saying, can I trust, this organization with my greatest with my greatest assets, right? My kids, right? These are the thing, these are the people that I love the most, that I protect the most. And so they had to ask that question. So the organization had to move quickly into that communication and talking about, here's what we're going to do going forward. Here's what this is going to look like. But it was that communication once they understood the depth and the breadth of that trust. And so that's really important that you understand, how far does this go? How deep does this go? And that lets you know how much work has to be done to help rebuild trust. So that's number 2. Number 3 is this: own up to the loss quickly instead of ignoring it or downplaying it. Own up to the loss quickly instead of ignoring it or downplaying it. That's really important for organizations to do. When trust has been broken, okay, when something has happened, whatever it was, you've got to jump on it quickly. And that's something I noticed with this organization. Once they heard the accusation, they immediately jumped in there. They immediately made the, they started the investigation. They got everything going. And again, it was probably less than a week that, this person was gone. And then kind of the damage control with the emails and communication. And hey, here's what's happening. Here's what we're doing. And they hired someone phenomenal, right? But they didn't ignore it. It wasn't like somebody reported this and they said, well, hey, let's give it a few more weeks and see what happens. And we're not sure if this is really the case. Oh, so-and-so, there's no way he would do something like this. He's such a great person. Why would he ever do this? No, you've got to own up to that loss quickly, and you've got to admit it. And I think as soon as he was let go, I think an email went out that same day. And again, it didn't explain the situation, but it did, it did talk a little bit about, it did discuss, hey, there's been an incident and there's been some things that have happened that you need to know about. It didn't involve kids, right? It was one of the younger staff members or something like that, but they were above age and all that. But they owned up to it quickly and they communicated that quickly. So that's really important for organizations to do, is really to own up to that. I want you to think about your own life and the people that are closest to you. If you've caught them in a lie, you've caught them in any kind of a situation that has broken down trust, if you come up to them and you try to ask for the truth and tell me what happened, the worst thing that they can do in that moment is then to try to start spinning out and start making something up, or not telling you the truth or not owning up to it. What we want to see is people who, when they make a mistake, just own up to it as quickly as possible. And I think that's really important. 4th, you've got to do this. You've got to identify as precisely as possible what you must accomplish in order to rebuild trust. Okay. So whatever the situation is, when you're in a situation where you have to rebuild trust, you've got to figure it out. Once you know what's happened, right? Once you have, once you understand the depth and the breadth of it, once you have owned up to it, you've communicated that, excuse me, then you identify as quickly as possible, right, what you've got to do to move forward. Now, this organization that I'm talking to you about, what they did is they recognized, hey, we had a really good person in this position. We thought we did, but there were some character things going on there behind the scenes. They made the decision to go all in, and they hired somebody just way above and beyond. They hired someone who was of the opposite sex than the original, director of this area. He was male. They hired a female, and they hired someone who was dynamically touted from another very large church. And so what they thought that they needed to do, what they believed that they needed to do, and I think they did a great job doing it, was, hey, we've had trust breakdown, and so we've got to go completely opposite. Instead of hiring from within, we're going to hire from outside. Instead of hiring another male, we're going to hire a female. They felt that was the best way forward to bring back that trust in that department. And again, it had to do with children and youth. And so for parents, they're thinking, I've got to make sure that I can trust that all the adults in this area, that they're above board, that they're doing what they're saying that they're going to be doing, that they're good people publicly and privately. That was important. And so they went almost overboard, and they found someone incredibly great at what she does, and they brought her in and paid her extremely well, from what I understand as well. And then 5th, here's what you got to do. List the changes that you'll make in the organizational structure, systems, people, and culture to achieve those outcomes. Okay. So they decided they had to hire somebody, but I also know that work was done to make it so that this couldn't happen again. Right. Because then the question was asking, how did this middle-aged man, how was he able to conduct this relationship with this young I think 18 or 19 or something like that. How did that happen? And how were they able to communicate? How did we not know that? And so then they built stronger systems and structures in place to make sure that that wouldn't happen again. And so that's part of rebuilding trust too. Again, no matter what it is, there are so many stories out there that you could research. I remember one when I was a kid, Tylenol. I don't know how the story went. I don't know if somebody got in there and poisoned a few bottles or something like that. But Tylenol had a real issue where things were coming off their, and you can look this up, but I think this was back in the 80s or early 90s. Their product was coming off the shelves, and some of it was making people very sick and maybe even worse. And I remember even as a kid watching the commercial where the CEO came on and he apologized for what happened. Now, again, that's probably a great case study. If we were in a class together and we were talking about trust, we'd probably pull that story up and we would look at what did the CEO of Tylenol do, or maybe it wasn't Tylenol, it's whatever company owned Tylenol, but what did that CEO do? What did that president do to rebuild trust? And I remember, I think they pulled everything from the shelves, which you can imagine what that did to their, profit and loss statement that quarter. But they felt it was very serious. It was serious enough that they had to do that, and they took extreme measures because they wanted to build back trust. And to this day, I don't have an issue going to Walmart or Walgreens if I'm having a headache. And I'm an Advil guy now, but for the longest time I was Tylenol. I'm Advil now because they've got that candy coating on the Advil. It's pretty addictive if you ask me. So anyway. I prefer Advil today, but Tylenol has always been the go-to, and I still would use Tylenol as well. I think, for my youngest daughter, I use Tylenol all the time. So I say all that to say that they did whatever they had to do to rebuild trust, but all of that's important no matter what the situation is, to rebuild trust and to get people back on purpose, right? That's the most important thing. You want the organization moving towards its purpose 24/7. Things actions that happen that lessen trust keep people unfocused off of the purpose, and it's important that you keep people on the purpose. So here's what I want you to do. I just want you to list the 5 things that we just talked about. What are the 5 ways to rebuild trust when you have to start over? And I just want you to list those. Just write a sentence about what I just said, and then just which one stands out most importantly. Which one stands out most important to you, and why. So again, just list out the 5 ones that we talked about, and then list out which one is most important to you and tell me why. And that's all you have to do. I hope that you've thought a little bit more about this idea of trust. I think that all is important. The article ends by saying this: trust within organizations is not easy to pin down. It's hard to measure, even in a quick and dirty way. And suppose you could measure it perfectly. The truth is that no company would ever get a perfect score. Organizations and people are too complicated for that, nor is it easy to define the trustworthy leader. Some exude emotional intelligence, others appear to be rather boring, extremely consistent, bureaucrats. And being human, even the best of them occasionally make mistakes that erode trust. But trust is the crucial ingredient of organizational effectiveness. Building it, maintaining it, and restoring it when it is damaged must be at the top of every chief executive's agenda. All right, everybody, you got your questions. Feel free to answer those, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next podcast. Take care. Have a great week. Stay cool, everybody.